Okay, so today, customers. It's all about the customers, and this one's going to be a really brief swing through why interacting with customers is a good thing for most of us that make money off of customers, and basically what Erlang has to do with that. Well, kinda, sorta. It's not really an Erlang-based thing, but Erlang kind of helps. So, the point being, that from a remarkably obvious and remarkably stupid perspective, it is about the customers. They're the ones that pay our bills. So, well, there you go. That's ludicrously revelatory, isn't it? It's like, wow, check it out. Customers, good for us, good for everybody, good for the economy. But from a tricky perspective, when you get down to it, the key isn't just getting customers. It's once you get your customers, you want to keep them. And when I say customers, I actually refer to anybody that at the end of the day is paying you money. I mean, that's effectively the point. So kind of from a really obvious perspective, when we talk about customers, what we always end up saying is, when we talk about customer communications, to be precise, what we think about is the marketing we do to them or customer support. People call us and we talk to them and so on. Just hold the thought. We'll get back to that in just a moment. The thing is, what we don't quite realize, what most people don't quite realize is you are always interacting with your customers. It's not just about customer support. It's not just about marketing or sales or any of that stuff. Pick your application, whatever it is. Think about, take a step back. I run a hosted PBX company. Think phone services company. We got our customer support center, we got our sales guys, we got our marketing folks, and frankly, they're the ones that interact with the customers the least, because literally every single time one of our customers makes a phone call, they're interacting with us. They picked up the phone, they're using our system. That's a customer interaction. When they log into our application, when they check their mail, when they get a voicemail, when anything that they do that uses our system, is a customer interaction. And that's one of these somewhat overlooked things. Because frankly, when you get down to it, and this is for the pure sales and marketing perspective, every single one of those interactions is a marketing moment. You can just pretend marketing people are good. You know, marketing folks are nice. Some of my best friends are folks in marketing. But anyhow, every time they log on the system, every time they make a phone call, it's a moment that you have, an ability you have, a slice in time, so to speak, when you have the ability to market to them. Anything, just the fact that they were able to make that phone call is a marketing moment because, hey, they're happy. They made that phone call, and it worked, which frankly is kind of amazing if you're on Verizon, but still, there you go. Sorry, Verizon people here? No, good. Every customer interaction is a teachable moment. And by the way, the opposite side of teachable is learning. It's a learning moment for you, potentially, or for them. They picked up that phone. They tried to make a phone call. It didn't work. It's a learning moment for them. Hey, this Vocalocity guy is not to be trusted. He told me they had the most reliable phone service this side of, I don't know, some mountain range. It's a learning moment for me. Wow, why did the system go down? That's not good. Why did the phone not work? That's not good. Oh, they didn't turn on the phone. That's happened too. Fine, that's a learning moment. Customers are stupid. That happens too. And my favorite, every single customer interaction is a karmic moment. And let me kind of take a step back on that. See the cookie jar? This is what I call my magic cookie jar. Picture this, or effectively picture this. You have this big cookie jar. It's empty. Just by keeping the customer happy, by the customer not complaining about something, cookies magically appear in that cookie jar. You can use those cookies to satisfy the customer. Customer complains about something, you're like, hey, here, have a cookie. Customer eats a cookie, walks away. They're kind of happy for a little while. If nothing happens, eventually the cookie jar becomes full because the customer is just happy. There's just a certain amount of happiness that they can have. If you have a disaster, something bad happens, oh my God, the system goes down. The customer is really cheesed off. You can basically say, here, take all the cookies. The customer kind of goes away for a little while. They're kind of placated, but it takes them a while to kind of like refill the jar with cookies. That's the magic cookie jar. Every single time the customer interacts with you, you have an ability to either add cookies to the cookie jar or remove cookies from the cookie jar. They made a phone call, it worked. What do you know? Another cookie. They made a phone call, it didn't work. All of a sudden, half the cookies are gone. That's what I call karmic moments. Every single one of your customer interactions is a key karmic moment. The thing is, every single one of these interactions counts. You know, they always talk about you never get a second chance to make a first impression. That works all the way down the pipe. You never get, you know, a 14th chance to make a 15th impression. Whatever, you just don't. Every single one of those things, every time they pick up a phone call, every time they pick up their phone to make a phone call, the game started all over again. The 42nd time they make a phone call and it doesn't work, hey, they're cheesed off again, and so on. That, by the way, lesson number 1, every interaction counts. The thing about communications is it comes in two kinds when we're talking about customers. There's what I term reactive communications, which is the customer is asking you for something. Who am I? Why am I here? What am I doing? Or a better way to think about it, the customer goes to the computer and says, I want to see my email. Customer logs into the thing. Customer goes to the Googles and says, where are the pizzerias around here? All of those are reactive when the customer asks for something. The opposite of reactive, proactive. That's stuff that you initiate to give your customer something. Slightly different way of thinking about it. It's me, I'm standing here, all of a sudden my phone rings. That's a proactive communication from the phone company to me saying, hey, there's a call for you. That is a customer communication, effectively. So kind of to take this a step further, what's the point behind all of this? Why am I harping about all of these? Why am I harping about customer communications to quite this extent? The thing is, at the end of the day, most of us, if not all of us, are in the business of doing something, providing a service, whether that service is a cloud-based service or a game, or whether it's a standalone controller that does God knows what, something annoying, probably. Whatever that thing is, we are in the business of providing some kind of service to end users who are hopefully paying us money for the service. The thing about this is, for the customers to pay us money, which feeds us and helps us go on vacation and stuff like that, we want to keep our customers happy. But the flip side to that is we also need to be able to build this thing in the first place. And odds are for most of us, or well, for some of us, either we're building it from scratch using our own money, we're building it from scratch using somebody else's money, or we're building it as part of some project at a company, one or the other. There may be other options too, I'm not quite sure what those would be. Anyway, in all of these situations, you got a bunch of requirements. As we heard in the keynote earlier today, you get these great requirements and we kind of sit around and say, cool, we got to build things based on these requirements. Nice, simple, easy. The problem is invariably the very first thing you do is you build a prototype and you put it out there. And building prototypes is easy, building prototypes is simple. The problem with building prototypes is they're almost always invariably and fundamentally nothing to do with the final thing that you're putting out there. It's just not going to be the same. So think about your classic prototype. Whatever it is, I don't care. You got a bunch of assumptions. Your assumptions are wrong. It doesn't matter what they are, they're wrong. In fact, The one thing I can guarantee you is about 99% of all your assumptions are going to be flawed. That's okay. You can like fix those as you go along. But the thing is, if you like fool yourself into thinking that your architecture, your glorious architecture that you are building out to, whatever, to do your thing, is going to be the solution for what you want to do, you're screwed. That's not going to happen for two reasons. One is, remember, your assumptions are flawed, so your great, grand, and glorious architecture is going to be wrong anyhow. And two, and much more importantly, your prototype doesn't use that architecture. Your prototype is something that you kind of threw together over a weekend, or heck, over like two weeks or 3 weeks, whatever. Or God forbid, you ended up in a committee and you put together the prototype. Either way, it's a prototype, you put it together. It does things differently from the way you want it to actually do whatever it is you want to do. Think about it, to bring this back to the customer communication perspective. Think about all the ways your prototype will be interacting with the end user. Pretend there's no Erlang stuff going on. Pretend this is the way most people in the world are doing things. Ruby, Node.js, God forbid, but something. What else? Perl. Oh yeah, Perl. Lots of Perl. Easy to do stuff in Python, in Perl, in Ruby, in PHP, and God knows what else. You slam it out there. CoffeeScript. Oh, there's another great one that should not exist, but it does. You put together services. You put together your domain objects. There's some database sitting down there, MySQL. Maybe it's a MySQL cluster because you really, really know what you're doing. Maybe it's Postgres and you decided to do triggers, really. I mean, people still do triggers. I was shocked, but it turns out they do. CGIs, because hey, come on, it's easy to do CGI. Oh, you're really good in HTTP REST API. And yeah, the point behind all of this is you put these things in, and you kind of sort of vaguely know that it's going to scale it somehow, somewhere, but you don't care because you just want it to work so that you can show it to Mr. Moneybags and get your money. Or show it to your boss and say, hey, look, it's working. And the boss says, great, now make it work for 100 million people, and all of a sudden you're screwed. But that comes later. The problem with all of this is every single thing that you build is going to evolve as patchware. Patchware basically is, for those of you that are not aware of this, patchware is the system that you built that basically evolved using duct tape and baling wire, which is what every single one of us, basically everything that we ever build is patchware, but there's different categories of patchware. So what happens? The scaffolding. Think the infrastructure associated with that which you are building. Your scaffolding is fundamentally, this is kind of, I'm getting very religious, I guess, at this point, but your scaffolding is flawed. You read this great article on Ruby on Rails, and you said, woohoo, this is the way everything should work, because somebody else said Ruby on Rails scales. So you built it. Well, it doesn't, but that's a separate story altogether. Or maybe it does scale, but it doesn't scale the way you want it to scale. Or, God forbid, and this in some ways the worst part of all, you built your application, you built your system, you put it up there, and it worked for the 5,000 users that you expected to get. And that is good, and life was great. And about a month later, you now had 7,000, and about 3 months later, you had 10,000, and about a month after that, you got another 1,000, and you're slowly adding users, and all of a sudden, your database is just sucking. So you look around, and somebody says, shard the database. So you shard the database, and boom, you're good for another 10,000 users and 6 months. And now you got performance problems because your big honkin' EJB, Apache, Tomcat, whatever front end is sucking. So then somebody says, put a load balancer and replicate this out there and do something else with JVMs, and that works, and you're good for another 10,000 users. You get the point. Degradation, systems degrade slowly. They don't degrade overnight. Or maybe you're lucky, and all of a sudden you got like 50 million users in your system, in which case you're also unlucky because it just degraded like that. But 9 times out of 10, they degrade slowly. So invariably what you end up with is what I call two-phase design, or 2+ phase design, which is you built the thing to demo, whatever it is that you wanted to demo. You got a bunch of customers, your customers were happy, then all of a sudden, the degradation kind of kicked in, so you kind of sit back, look at the whole thing and say, great, I'm going to re-architect this whole thing from scratch. So you re-architect it completely based on all the stuff you've learned. And now you know, hey, I got this right, it's going to work properly now. And about a year later, you re-architect it again, and this time you actually get it right. So that's the 2+ part. And that's just the way the system world works. And the problem, which, to recap, what you always discover is that you didn't understand your own problem. You just didn't. You thought you did, but you didn't. You really didn't understand your tool set. Now, this one's a bit of a tricky one. Java people, well, I assume some or most of you have dealt with Java at some point or the other. It's great, it's fun. Java, you know what? People rag on Java. I got nothing against Java, it's just a language. Fine. The JVM now, that is evil. I mean, that is evil personified. But people don't think about the JVM. People only start thinking about the JVM when all of a sudden they realize they got to deal with all those flags, -XM, 256 meg, whatever. What's a heap? What's this? What's that? Oh, great, garbage collection? Oh shit, garbage collection. Issues that you have to deal with that you're just not aware of when you're writing, because as far as you're concerned, it's a language. You compile it, you run it, and boom, it works. And then somebody points out it's running in this thing called the JVM, which is God's greatest gift to mankind, and you think, wow, that's great too. It just runs anywhere as long as there's a JVM there. And then somebody points out that, JVMs have their own issues, and there's memory, and there's this thing called garbage collection, and you say, what? Wait a minute, garbage collection just happens automatically. And they go, well, kind of, sort of, and things get locked, and things happen, and when there's garbage collection going on, all of a sudden, your UI slows down, and this happens, and you're sitting there going, they never taught me any of this stuff. Or when they're talking about this stuff, I was sleeping because I thought it's a language. Whatever. So, the point behind this being, your tool sets are actually your own worst enemy. It's, if you can't, to take a whole bunch of steps back, and this is more from a pure coding perspective, if you can't just look at the code for how the system actually does what it's supposed to do, and most importantly, understand what it's doing, just leave it right there and walk away, or ask for another 0 on your paycheck, because one of those two is necessary. It's not going to work otherwise. And the last part, it's not going to scale the way you thought it was, because it just isn't. It's not going to scale the way you thought. I'll leave it at that. The tricky part about all of this, back to customers interacting with your system, and I'll put it more as APIs now. Your users will find more ways of screwing you up than you can possibly imagine. That's guaranteed. I mean, here's a quick one. This is something that happened to us. This is kind of like a passive approach to screwing us up. About a couple of months ago, due to no fault of ours entirely, our entire cloud-based, too distributed to fail infrastructure crashed. Well, the reason it crashed was because our data center provider basically pulled the plug on a whole bunch of cages, and all of our servers went down. Fine, whatever. Forget the blame part. So hey, we're down. What do? You start up your system, right? Wrong. The last time we did a cold start was not that long ago. It was Christmas morning at 2 a.m. This is a cold start of the entire system. Easy. 2 a.m., Christmas morning, everybody's asleep or, dreaming of presents or looking at instructions saying some assembly required or something like that. But at 2 p.m. on a Wednesday afternoon, you're basically looking at everybody, every single one of our customers online at the same time. So when we went down, we started bringing our system up. All of a sudden, every single one of those customers tried to either make a phone call, log in, or do something in real time. So the first node to come up promptly crashed under the load. So we got all these great routines, and we got all these system startup procedures. Nothing worked. We had to like hack our way through the whole process. In fact, this is totally on a tangent, something I can guarantee you, Adam, this is for you. Your cold start routines will not work. But serious note though. There we go. Things happen that you don't expect. Cold starting, massive distributed, fault-tolerant thingies. When was the last time you did it, really? And much more importantly, what is the order of magnitude of users you're looking at back then? All our routines were based upon about 2, maybe 3 orders of magnitude less interactions in the system. When anything scales by 3 orders of magnitude, all the rules go out the window. Not just, and to bring this back to customers, not just because users are just doing things 1,000 times more frequently. It's because you got different types of users doing different types of things that you didn't expect. Remember what I said? They'll find ways to do things that you didn't expect. Users are the bane of my existence. Mind you, they're also good, but they pay us money, but there we go. So to bring this full circle, what's the point behind all of this? About 5 years ago, maybe 4 years ago, whatever, not important. Our entire application base was this big, huge, honking Java, EJB, whatever thing, and it basically worked, except about 110% of our entire developer base and system base and management base and everything was devoted to just keeping our systems up and running. We had zero ability to do anything new because, total development budget equaled maintenance budget on systems, and that was it. So about, 4 or 5 years ago, we kind of sat back and said, let's redo this from scratch. And this is a story for a separate presentation, but we just basically threw everything out the window and did a from scratch, re-architect the whole thing in Erlang OTP, blah, 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 and life got a lot better. Part of the context behind this is to fast forward a couple of slides here. Part of the context here is what you need to ask yourself is, where do you want to be spending your time when you're doing anything? Do you want to spend your time working on scaffolding? Do you want to spend your time working on just keeping your system up and running? Which is a noble endeavor, by the way. A system that's up is better than a system that's not up. But if 100% of your time is spent on keeping your system up, that other company over there that's busy spending their time trying to figure out what customers want and how to keep the customers happy, they're going to eat some metaphor like eat your shirt or eat your lunch or take your shirt or whatever. Basically, your host. So the thing about using, and this is a lot of preaching to the choir here, but the thing about using Erlang OTP, et cetera, for whatever you need to do, for your system, for your environment, is if you are in a scaling environment, if you're in an environment where you expect to grow by a couple of orders of magnitude or more, if you are in an environment where you actually care about soft real-time systems, where you actually care about fault tolerance and so on and so forth, if you build it with OTP behaviors, if you build it in Erlang, it takes care of these things for you. Yeah, we know that. We all know that. But that's not the point. I need to emphasize this. It takes care of this stuff for you, which means you don't need to worry about this stuff. You just don't. With the extremely ridiculously rare scenario in which you actually find a bug, let's pretend you do. Except for that, it just works. So what you end up spending all of your time on is the magic word, customers. So all of a sudden, your big honking distributed system It's just kind of ticking along. Now what you can do is kind of step back, ask yourself, hey, what do customers want? How can I help them? How can I do things for them? So this is kind of like a long-winded way of kind of getting back to the point, which is the 4 lessons that I brought up here earlier. Every single thing you do, every single thing your customer does, every one of these interactions reflects on you and reflects on your ability to get revenue from your customers. Every single one of those things. Every interaction counts. These interactions just get harder and harder the more you scale. That gorgeous CGI you wrote that goes in and hits a database and does a table scan to throw a bunch of data up on the screen works great as long as you're the only customer. Absolutely does not work when you got 5,000 people doing it simultaneously. Step further. As you scale, as you grow, you will be spending more and more time just keeping your system up and running. What you need to ask yourself is, what percentage of time are you willing to devote to that? Much more importantly, what percentage of pain and suffering and annoyance in your mind and money that you have in your budget are you willing to devote to this? The combination of those two basically takes you to the last part, which is, if you're smart, use something that takes care of that for you and spend your time working with your customers. And that's all I got, folks.
Are there any questions? I'm really curious. You said that your first version had no OTP. So you guys had Erlang with no OTP?
Oh, no. The first version was Java.
Okay.
Horrible, horrid.
And do you still use both? Or is it
We have our old environment sitting around. It's got about 60% of our clients on it. Because the one, okay, this is kind of evil, but we've got a pretty, sorry, it is evil. We've got a whole bunch of clients who seem to be quite happy not getting anything new.
right?
Now, they'll churn out eventually, because they're going to sit there going, wait a minute, this is, I can get the coffee grinder attachment if I go over there. You just give me phone calls. I prefer coffee with my phone calls. Great, that works. But what we also discovered is most of those people, they churn out back to us. And on a non-evil perspective, we actually kind of did a pretty heavy survey of our own clients, and the people that we have on our old system are people that literally just are doing phone calls. They're not doing anything else. Our new system does all these fancy whiz-bang things with GUIs and displays and notifications and the coffee grinder attachment. People that want that come to us. People that don't want that are perfectly happy sitting out there.
Right.
But we have 0 people dedicated to it. We actually don't have any developers remaining that worked on that stuff. The only person that knows anything about how that works is me, which is frightening. I mean, like, unsurpassingly frightening. So, there you go.
Any others?
The problem I found several times is that when you actually rewrite something, you change the behavior and you change the loads that they go into different places. So your existing customers who have found that things used to work one way suddenly find that it works another way. Do you think that's a problem?
It's, so this kind of goes back to the you didn't know what you were doing and so on. Our first system was patchware at 2 levels. It was patchware in a physical, the way the application evolved perspective, but it was also patchware in a business rule perspective. Here's a beautiful example. This system evolved from the mid-90s, this big hosted PBX thingy. So one of the features that we put in was the ability where, as you are, if you're on a phone call and you want to say, record this call, you could hit the pound key on your phone and it would play a little menu saying, if you want to transfer this call, press 1. If you want to record the call, press 2, blah, blah, blah. Sounds like a great idea. It is brilliant. People loved it, except what happens when you call into like a bank and you're going through their automated menu system and it says, type in your social security number followed by the pound key, right? All of a sudden, that didn't work. So patchware, where's patchware coming to this? Easy solution. You now have to press pound pound for anything to happen, which you think would work, except it turns out that a lot of banks actually have pass-throughs where they intercept the first pound key and pass the second pound key to somebody further down the pipe. So it's just like bad karma. Whatever you do, it's going to fail along those lines. So we wised up when we discovered that nobody uses a star key, everybody uses the pound key. Hence, the new version of the system moves from pound pound to star star. But that cheeses off the people that are used to the old system, and we're back to what you're describing. But on a related note to that, though, I call this the rule of threes, which is the third time you ever touch a piece of code, rewrite that code. Right? That's kind of like my default rule of thumb for anything. The flip side to that is the third time you ever encounter a screwed up business rule, change it. So there are a couple of things, actually there's a whole bunch of things in the old system which were patchware that we effectively just nuked and put in something drastically different. The problem is, remember all the people that I mentioned who just used the old system for phone calls? Most of them are people that are not happy doing anything other than things the old way. Take this a step back. Years and years ago, I had an admin. This was, God, in 1986. My admin was this woman, Betty, God bless her, who had this very unique filing mechanism. And the filing mechanism was every single file on her computer was numerical and an auto-incrementing number, basically. And she was at something like 67,352 or whatever. And she knew, oh, you mean the letter that we sent to the vice chancellor? That was in the thousands. Let me go look at that the number, and she'd figure out which one was which. The problem here being that made complete sense to her because she knew she roughly knew the time frames and numbers. Yeah, the thousands were 3 years ago. We had like about 30,000 letters last year, so I know, stuff like that. It doesn't make sense to anybody else in the world. So a lot of the really idiotic things that we have in the old version of our system is unfortunately stuff we've trained our users into using. So they like using things which are stupid because we told them it was smart, because we have tactical marketing, woohoo, whatever. So that's the other side of what you just described, which is it's not just that users are dumb, we make our users dumb. We all do.
Are there any other things anyone would like to ask?
Thank you.
Thanks. Please.